What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we are back on the LT4 K10. The chassis work is all completed. We've got the frame sitting on the ground, engine installed. We have some final welding of all the frame boxing. Once that's all finished, we can blow this thing apart and get it ready for paint. And we're also gonna be starting on our cab modifications. We have a lot of cutting and a lot of grinding to do, so we're gonna have to get to work.
I'm gonna finish stripping down the cab so we can start getting ready to prep this firewall. We gotta make some patches. We're gonna close up some of these holes. We're also gonna be taking our fenders off. Side view mirrors are gonna come off because we're gonna be replacing those with something much cooler. This chrome trim coming out. This thing is in really good shape. There is like zero rust. Let's get to work. So I got the passenger side of the firewall prepped. I'm gonna be cutting out a good amount of this section in here and then patching it. I don't know if this is like factory seam sealer or if somebody globbed this in at some point. I can't imagine a factory would do this, but it's on there pretty thick. I decided to remove this bracket for the steering column. It's bulky and it's ugly. Something tells me there's some seam sealer back there. All right, we got both sections all cut out. So this is all gonna be one piece. We're gonna make a template. We're gonna do a little bead rolling in here and in this section. This section's also cut out, but our plan is to make an inner piece. This is where our master cylinder is attached and our steering column comes through. So this is gonna need to be a little bit more heavy duty because you're gonna be pushing on your brake pedal and everything. If you remember what I cut out, I had that huge brace here. So now that's gone, we're gonna have to make some of our own. So I got my templates made for the passenger side. I got my inner template made for my driver's side. We're gonna go ahead and cut this the old school way. I know Dave's been pretty good at transferring our templates on our plasma table, but he's busy over there working, so we're just gonna go ahead and do it the old school way. While Khalil's over there prepping our firewall on the cab, I'm gonna go ahead and lay out some B-roll. I kind of just hand sketch something in real quick. This is our front side, so we're actually gonna need to lay it out on the rear. So I'm gonna clean off some of this rust with our DA. Then I'm gonna go ahead and mark my edges, and there'll be a B-roll on this side and then one on this side. There you go, we got our passenger side panel all prepped. There you go, got our B-rolls in. So not only does it add a cool design, it doesn't make it plain, but it also just adds some rigidity to the panel. So now that that's done, I'm just gonna hit this with a DA, and then I'm gonna hand it off to the young buck, Khalil. We can make sure it fits well before we go ahead and weld it in. So our goal with this is to do a butt weld. So we're trying to get these two panels to meet without any gaps, make a bunch of tacks with our MIG welder, then fully weld it, grind it out, blend it, and body work it. All right, so I got my inside piece. This panel is more for some structural support once we put our brake pedal back in. So this is just gonna be an inside piece that I'm gonna weld up here on the cowl. I think that should work. I got this piece all welded in, up top, all the way around. Now I'm gonna go around the other side, mark my holes here, and then I'm gonna go ahead and cut out the section of the firewall. Do the same thing that we did over here with some B-rolls. So my B-roll came out great, but as you see here, we have our master cylinder that's gonna be coming through the firewall, and we're gonna be cutting and drilling into this section of B-rolling. So I'm gonna redo it and shape it around that. area right here. I'm gonna use our plenishing hammer, flatten this area out a little bit, and then I'm gonna bead roll this section. It's like it was never even there.
While Mike is smoothing out that cab, we need to talk about our frame. So when we had originally planned the shock coupe, we were thinking about taking the steering column from our imaginary cab over here, running it down, putting a joint on our frame, and then coming back down to the steering gearbox. But I think that what we want to achieve instead is just modify our hoop and have our steering column come straight from our cab. So when our cab was on here, we had marked exactly where this column runs, and as it runs through, we want to keep it in as straight a line as possible. Plan is to get another piece of tubing, make a platform, weld it to the frame, and come up and get welded to here, so that there's some sort of triangulation when we notch this part out and make way for our steering column to pass through. So we're gonna cut a piece of tube here, make a nice box for it to sit on, weld it all in.
Before we finalize this small change here that we're making, we don't want to make a mistake and not have the proper alignment with our steering column. So what we're going to do is get our cab up in the air on the lift and put it back onto the chassis, because we don't want to be doing this multiple times after we're in the final stage. So we're going to get this cab mounted back on the frame for now so we can get our proper measurements. It's good. You nailed it for sure. But the joint. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to use our stock steering shaft, which is not that big of a deal. We'll get an aftermarket collapsible shaft for here and a different joint for up there, because this one is bulky and it's hitting. All right, so Dave's wrapping up all the structural stuff on the chassis and the front side, and I'll just be back here working on some aesthetics, cleaning up all the holes in the side of the frame with some plug welds. All right, so I've got a lot of the holes filled, everything that I can do with just some MIG wire. Now I'm gonna go ahead and cut out some blank pieces to fill into these larger holes. Just use a magnet, hold them in place against the original base material. Boom, push it in there like that, and then we'll just fill in the gap with the weld and blend it in nice and flat.
So the next step on this K10 is doing the bump stops. We got these hydraulic bump stops. What these bump stops will do is they'll prevent the shock from fully compressing, and these will mount to the frame right here. They have these weldable sleeves, so we'll make some plates to adapt to the frame, and then the actual bump piece here will hit this bracket that's off our front axle. What we need to do in order to get the right positioning for these is that we're gonna have to take off these springs so we can compress our shock manually. Having 1 inch of travel showing, we'll hit the bump stops first before compressing the shock into itself. So we're gonna pull these shocks, take the springs off them, put them back on, manually compress it, and then we'll know exactly what we need to design at what height. We have about 1.5 inches showing here, which is probably about as low as we ever want to go on the shock. So if we have our bump stop here, and I'll count for this 1/2 inch of compression that naturally pushes out. You can almost get it pushed by hand, but this is where our frame sits when the bump stop is almost fully compressed. This is where this sits onto the frame. Now I know exactly where I need to stand off pieces welded to the frame to grab the bump stop. So I cut out my 2 pieces and tacked them in where they're gonna catch the frame on the back side here and here. What I wanna do next is create a piece to box in the top of this before we weld it on the frame side. I got my little cutout piece here. Here's the bump stop with the 2 tabs. And this is gonna go boxed in just like that. I made my pieces here that are gonna become my box. This radius grabs around our axle and makes a nice spot for us to weld. Be like this, 2 on the other side, make a box. This bottom will sit on top of the axle tube and get welded. And they'll give us a nice flat spot up here for our bump stop to rest on. So we're gonna clean these up, tack them together, cut our top piece, and then final weld them. So before we do our final welding, I'm just putting the bump stops one at a time, all 4 corners, and then jacking up the axle to mate with the bump stop. And that way we could see exactly when the bump stop compresses how much travel's left of the shock. We did the math to design it, but it's always good to just double check all your work before you put a bunch of final welds.
All right, there we go.
Yep.
We're halfway into the travel, the bump stop already, and we're still about 1.5 inches away from full compression on what we consider the bump. We consider bump stop about 1 inch away from being fully compressed, because you don't want to have the shaft completely go into the body of the shock. That's what the purpose of the bump stop is, so you're not slamming the shaft or the piston all the way up into the shock body. This is looking real good. Now we'll be able to go ahead and finalize our tacks over here. We already did the rear. So now that we're done cycling it, double checking all of our measurements and making sure everything functions correctly, we're gonna go ahead and start finalizing all the welding.
All right guys, so you saw us do all of our final welds, our bump stop fabrication, smoothing of the firewall, and here it is. The cab is back on the chassis one last time because all this stuff is gonna get taken apart. All the suspension parts and the frame and the firewall are all gonna get painted before we do final assembly. So that is what you are gonna see next time. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so that way you can keep up with this build and all of our other shop builds as well. Peace.